Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're just waiting for James to come back. There he is. So, we're going to start this session. Hope everybody had a little bit of a break to maybe grab some lunch. Once again, this will be recorded and available for rebroadcast later on the Swalco or the ILCSWMA website. and that's where we're at right now. I'm just seeing if I've got anybody else coming into the room. So I'm going to bring James on. Here we are. And I want to welcome him. For those that may not have been introduced to James in the past, James Jennings is with the Illinois EPA Waste Reduction Compliance Section as the manager of that section for the IEPA. Today he's going to be speaking on the topic of the Illinois Materials Management Advisory Committee, which wrapped up their work, I think, was that in July, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And many of you may have heard of it. Some of you have not. And I think James is going to give us a pretty comprehensive overview of it all. So I will pass it over to James here. And then, James, when you wish to share your screen, just let me know and I'll bring that up. Okay. I'm going to step away. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Pete. And I went ahead and shared. So hopefully this should be visible. Can you see that, Pete?
Yes.
All right. Perfect.
So everybody should be able to see you.
Okay. And thanks, everyone. And the one note that Pete raised when he and I did our test of this ahead of time, just because of how my laptop's set up, I actually can't see any questions. So all the really profound ideas that you all are imparting while I'm talking, we'll have to capture at the end, just because the other option is for me to basically close out the entire presentation and burn all of your all's time. But I want to thank everyone for sitting in this afternoon. I'm going to cover some of the work that a pretty broad range of us, including many who are on the call, did over the last year and a half in working on the statewide Materials Management Advisory Committee and ultimately drafting a report that was issued to the General Assembly in July outlining the committee's recommendations, many of which are directly applicable to local government within Illinois, and I'll hopefully provide you all a really well-developed roadmap into revisiting some of the local planning that's been done over the past couple of decades. Some of you all have seen various portions of this before, and so I'm going to try to just give it some superficial background, but get to the real substance of it. In 2019, Governor Pritzker signed a bill that required the agency to identify a collection of 25 experts statewide in various sectors, including government, industry, the environmental community, and manufacturing, to help craft a statewide report that outlined the various elements of materials management and solid waste planning, and included a roadmap to meaningfully divert materials from Illinois landfills. The report had some minimum content requirements, including an analysis of the statewide waste composition, examinations of markets for divertible materials, identifying diversion goals, mapping facilities, and then providing some standardized content for planning by local government. In effect, it was a hard reset of a combination of various reports that had been issued in the past, and then targeted to reflect the information that we'd gleaned in the 5 years since the most recent iteration of this type of document. And so the group first met in February of 2020, and that actually ended up being our only in-person meeting. And one of the primary takeaways from that meeting was the need to sort of divide and conquer the work based on the categories that really honed in on the core requirements of the bill that established the committee. And we divided into 5 groups, each of which had a agency representative participating and then an external subcommittee chair. Our education and outreach group was co-chaired by Kay McKean of Scarce and Don Buis from our group. Our infrastructure development group actually went through some rotations, but it was co-chaired by Walt Willis from Swalco, and then initially Dave Saladino, who was working in our group at the time and then took a transfer, and then Sunil Suthar, who was our waste reduction unit manager. The market development group was co-chaired by Lisa Disbrow with waste management and me. Our measurement group was co-chaired by Suzanne Boring and Shantanu Pai, who was at ISTC at the time. And then the local government group was co-chaired by Jen Jarlin with Kane County and Jessica Miller, who, for those of you who aren't going to make our call tomorrow morning, will know that she's actually left the agency. She accepted what amounts to a promotion, going to Region 6 at US EPA. And actually, just in thinking this through, you do have to kind of wonder whether the attrition wore folks down, as we have had a lot of collective departure from the group that staffed the tops of those individual groups. So thereafter, each group effectively outlined their mission and the items that needed to be included in the report, and were the deliverables from those committees. They met monthly, brought in speakers from the outside to discuss topics that were potentially relevant to their subject matters. They crafted over a series of months recommendations that the groups ultimately approved and then went to the committee for inclusion in the report. All these materials are still available on our website. State records law actually require us to maintain those. And so any of the resources that any of these groups utilized are available online. And to the extent that you have any local planning that needs to be done that could tie to them, I would encourage you to examine them. The groups did a tremendous amount of research to be able to achieve what was required by this bill. And as a result, there's a library of information that's centralized that is publicly available. So as you'd expect in a report that exceeded 200 pages, there were a lot of recommendations. I mean, this bill required us to pull together a great deal of material. And some of the high points are a targeted landfill diversion of 50% by 2035. Right now, we're at just north of 37%. And so that marks a pretty significant increase. We've taken a unique approach to identifying what materials to target for landfill diversion. The model that we've included, as you'll see later, actually is pretty flexible. It's oriented based on the characteristics of end-of-life handling of materials, rather than categorizing materials in a static way based on their composition. As you'd expect, we are recommending increasing financing for materials management projects statewide. Historically, it's been widely circulated that tipping fees exceed existing expenditures from the Solid Waste Management Fund. The group did an analysis of what was available historically and projected revenue based on OMB's information, and identified a series of improvements that can be made without actually raising any additional fees or revenue to support them. We're taking a unique approach to market development grants and how those could be selected. There was a proposal and subsequent recommendation to push a statewide marketing campaign on waste reductions. And then there are a series of other data-driven improvements, really things that some other states already do, mapping facilities in a consistent manner, extracting statewide publicly available data and publishing it online, and then doing other internal tracking of items that aren't necessarily included as part of historic annual reports. These were all exercises that we had to undertake as a committee to be able to achieve the objectives of the report. And given the effort required, but also the value of the information, it was the collective wisdom of the group that this should be an ongoing effort. And then finally, enhancing the approach to local government solid waste reporting by developing a consistent and simplified approach that is able to accommodate the entire spectrum of local government planning, from counties that aren't as well funded and don't have some of the existing infrastructure to be able to support a really robust on-the-ground materials management program, to some of the local governments within the state that are among the nation's leaders in pioneering these type of programs. One of the items that jumps out of the report, though, as you'd expect, are the landfill diversion goals. The state has not historically had mandatory recycling targets or landfill diversion targets that have been codified in this manner. Based on the information that Shantanu's team was able to pull together, we determined that our existing diversion rate is roughly 37%. And then we identified incremental enhancements of that for each of the next 5 years. One thing that Shantanu pointed out with at a pretty frequent rate is that even though these percentages are somewhat small comparatively, the amount of volume of material that goes into a 5% increase in landfill diversion is really profound. And as he noted in one of our meetings, I mean, there are entire sectors of material currently going to landfills that could be diverted and still end up not achieving those goals. And so that was where a really broad approach was going to be necessary, and an ambitious approach to be able to achieve these goals. The couple of upcoming slides on how we approached which materials to target for diversion are merely an overview of the entire procedure that we examined as part of this group. So I'm going to try to cover this in a meaningfully detailed way, but there's a link at the conclusion of the presentation. It will tie you to the report. I'd really encourage people, if they're interested, to examine this. I know the group collectively put a lot of thought into how we would approach this process. And this is not something that has been examined by any other state in the country. And so in that respect, this is entirely new to how a larger jurisdiction is approaching diverting materials. And so what went into this, Shantanu had diversion data and waste generation data for effectively the entirety of household waste streams in Illinois. As part of that, his team then did an analysis of the rate at which material could be meaningfully diverted from landfills, both today and in the recent history, and then tried to identify some commonalities between materials that presented problems. And ultimately, these were those commonalities. So the top left corner are the materials that were the most recoverable. And really what that amounted to was established collection programs, infrastructure, and markets. Basically, the entire chain of commerce that you need to be able to actually divert an item from the landfill exists. And there's access across the state. The other categories then had waning levels of establishment within each of those categories. And based on the work that his team did, we were able to fit, at least as of today, where almost everything that goes to a landfill falls within the state. An important point about this, though, is that in using this tool to do statewide planning, or if any local governments elect to evaluate their local waste shed in the same manner, this isn't a static approach. So this information was accurate as of the date that the report was published. There hasn't been a significant temporal lapse between then and now, so it's probably still accurate now. But in 2025, when ideally we have hit a 40% landfill diversion, there will need to be a hard reset on how materials fit within these categories. Ideally, by then, some of the materials that today merely have piloted collection programs with markets that are under development will have more established markets, better processing infrastructure, which could then justify a different approach to how they're handled at the end of their life. And so one of the examples of that is included here. So these were the materials that Shantanu's group, based on the data they had, felt fit into that primary category. So these are items that are recoverable and divertible in a relatively widely accessible manner, and have things that, while they still may need support and still need to ensure that there's adequate development done on infrastructure to avoid technology becoming out of date, these were the items that the research indicated had a degree of stability. The long-term objective for this would be that we're able to find ways to fit everything into this rubric. That's just not how things exist today, though. And so items that met these criteria, the group determined that the strategies for helping bolster those areas would be increased participation through education and outreach, and then finally tuning the infrastructure and market needs rather than taking any steps to profoundly upset those, because for the data, it appears that, comparatively speaking, these items were working. And we had a similar analysis for each of the other four categories. Really, the primary thesis behind it, though, was that individual characteristics of those types of materials should dictate the strategies for how they're approached, rather than taking a specific approach to each individual item, given that the marketability or the infrastructure for those items can change over time. The next item, and this is one that directly impacts local government, is proposed additional state funding. Again, The agency's analysis, the analysis by from OMB indicated that every dollar that is proposed to be spent by this plan is covered by existing revenue at existing levels. And so if revenue were to go up for any reason, such as increased fees from material from C&D facilities, which today we know are coming and didn't know at the time of this report, just further provide some cushion to be able to spend. These are big numbers, and as are outlined in the report, these aren't all numbers that are picked up within any within the same state fiscal year. But the investments are really on revitalizing the historic state grant program, which would cover market development, infrastructure, and then education spending. We're proposing expanding the HHW collection network and the financing for that. And then there was a proposal that made it into the report for a $1 million appropriation to cover local solid waste planning. What that would look like would be that units of local government would be eligible for up to a specific amount of money to dedicate toward their solid waste plan redevelopment. Not all counties would be required to come in for that amount, which would potentially provide additional flexibility for that spending. But it's money that historically was spent in that manner, and based on the information we had, comparison to other states and the wisdom of the group, it seemed like a sound time to revisit that type of spending. One of the unique elements of the revitalized grant program was borrowing some ideas that have been implemented successfully in Colorado, Michigan, Kansas, Indiana, and other states. For market development, what that looked like was actually using some framework that exists already in Illinois state law to allow non-governmental entities to have some oversight and input on how grant funds are potentially spent. And what that would look like here would be a gubernatorially appointed market development advisory board. So in effect, a almost Shark Tank panel group of experts who could assist representatives from, as proposed, the University of Illinois and the agency in evaluating the veracity and likelihood of success of proposed projects and their potential positive market impact. This would avoid a situation where money was just being handed out based on an application or a well-funded submission. Rather, there'd be a meaningfully deep evaluation of the substance of these proposals compared to other projects that are currently ongoing outside of government. This state law allows us for procurement and other awards, and given how successful it's been in other states, the group determined to also propose mirroring this approach here. One of the other elements, and this is something that's going to be particularly valuable for local planning, is consistently updated statewide mapping. This is an example of one of the maps that was included in the report, but we pulled information from a wide range of publicly available sources to map landfills, recycling facilities, transfer stations, compost sites, and a variety of other types of entities, so that so readers could get a capture of what is currently available today in the state. Many states do this exercise annually or biannually. The report also recommended that we explore that route, which would have a lot of value. But these are things that are included in the report. And if for any county that's going to reevaluate its solid waste planning needs in the next couple of years, I certainly recommend using this at least as one of your many resources in examining what options are available to you. And so the final point that ended up taking a significant amount of Jen Jarlin, Jessica Miller, and many other really valuable contributors' time was developing the framework for local solid waste management planning. This is an ongoing project. So the report included some recommended bumpers to include in the plan, but there's a lot of detail that can be built in within those, including potential best practices for how a county may proceed. And so we contemplate doing some additional outreach on that to help provide further guidance as counties' plans are going to start coming due. But the baseline that we have to operate off of is existing state law. State law establishes a solid waste hierarchy, including the mandate on having a recycling program. and then some additional items that are included in the agency's admittedly dated but existing form that's used for solid waste management planning. State law requires a 5-year update, and there are penalties for failure to update. And the agency's primary manner for evaluating these is if necessary and appropriate revisions are submitted to us. In reality, what we've seen occur here is that not all counties submit plans to us, and there's a variety of potentially supportable and unsupportable reasons for that. But this gave the agency an opportunity to work with other representatives of local government, update the planning tools that are available, and then do a new evaluation on the consistency and perhaps accuracy as well of what's being done statewide. So Jen's group pulled together a lot of very ambitious structural changes. So there is a standardized report that's included in the document that was submitted to the General Assembly, but then embedded with that was a nod to the reality that not all local governments are created the same. And as a result, there's going to be some varying degrees of nimbleness between counties on who may be able to implement these new changes and when that implementation may be realistic. And so the recommendation that was included was to provide some flexibility for counties to be able to get a new plan in, but then also to target counties that hadn't done a plan update in recent years and encourage them to use this new form. So as a threshold matter, if a county had not submitted or hadn't revisited their recycling and solid waste plan within the last 5 years, the recommendation is to use the proposed format from the submission to the General Assembly within the next 18 months. However, if a plan has been revisited in accordance with state law, then just roll the new format in with their next reporting window. Having seen some of the reports that come in, some counties, this won't make a meaningful difference. The group reviewed a wide range of county plans as part of their work, and some counties are already achieving each of the minimum suggestions that's included in this document. What our next step from that would be to find ways to further enhance those plans rather than resting on what amounts to the existing status quo. We also recognize, though, that some of these plans can be expensive, and even before COVID, local government budgeting was typically very tight. And so because of the reality that some statewide solid waste management money could be available, the recommendation was to specifically push some of that toward these type of plans to avoid a situation where a local government that is well-intentioned and has sound ideas for their plan is unable to move on them because of lack of money. So the template, a lot of these are more robust iterations of what existing state law is, but they're iterations that are really needed in light of the fact that the law that governs this hasn't been updated since the mid-1990s. And that hasn't prevented any of our jobs from changing during that time. And so what existed then certainly has varied between then and now. Nonetheless, we'll still need an overview of the current plan and its implementation. Each county is different. Each of your experiences is going to vary based on the realities of your individual constituencies. And so as part of your examination of what needs to be improved going forward, it's certainly going to be helpful to see what has worked in the past. And if things that have worked in Wabash County or Richland County wouldn't work in Wabash County, then this is an area where it's going to be helpful to be able to illustrate that in a meaningful way. The next items are really derivatives of what's included in the report we submitted to the General Assembly. So a roster of your existing infrastructure within your county. Ideally, this will be material you can pull from statewide resources rather than to hire somebody to pull the information together for you. A waste generation assessment. There are really two ways that, or multiple ways you can go about this. The two that we heard most commonly during these discussions were either bringing in a consultant to do their own evaluation. And certainly that's going to be the most county specific and likely most accurate option. The second option is to borrow the data which were included in the advisory committee's report and then retrofit it to your county. Based on the discussions with ISTC, That's appeared to be a statistically sound approach. But again, each county is different. Your resources are different. And to the extent that you have the ability to develop a more precise examination of what your residents are generating, that's certainly a sound approach. And then the fun part. So the final three items are really where each county has some flexibility to be creative. Any proposed programs, borrowing from either other jurisdictions that you know of in Illinois or other jurisdictions around the country. This is really the opportunity to kind of push the envelope on where you can see your locality going. An assessment of public education and outreach, again, how you're reaching the public, what's working and what's not. And then probably the area that would vary the most within or between Illinois counties, partnerships, policy, and funding. The funding element would be an examination of what resources are being used to support your programs locally, and potentially if there's either going to be a need to cut back or if there's opportunities to expand. Partnerships and policies are inherently county specific, and will vary between local governments based on who lives in your county, what stakeholders are impactful, what stakeholders are helpful, and then potentially the policy determinations made by elected officials, which, as you'd know, is going to vary over time. The current and proposed programs within the report are then further divided down into 6 macro categories. The first being the materials to target for diversion. Again, the matrix that's included in the report can serve as a sound foundation for identifying locally what materials you want to target, and then determining which ones that you want to push to the side, which may be pushed heavily by other counties. An examination of traditional materials diversion efforts. This, in many respects, covers programs that have existed statewide historically. So curbside recycling, used or waste tire recovery, C&D material, mainly things that there's some level of statewide infrastructure. And that infrastructure has existed for a relatively significant amount of time. Organics diversion efforts. Our primary discussions on this front focused on landscape waste composting and organics, or food waste and other organic materials. Certainly, this will continue to evolve, but the overwhelming weight of our conversations on this front oriented around those 2 subject matters. Non-traditional materials are the growing areas of materials recovery that haven't necessarily been developed for a long enough time to justify being considered part of the mainstream. And so this is where there's a wide range of coverage statewide, from repair stores and reuse opportunities. Historically, electronics could have fallen into this category, although over the last decade those would have moved up. This is really more of the niche recovery that local solid waste coordinators will probably have the best sense of what's ongoing in the county and what options are on the horizon. Alternative technology implementation. This is really local infrastructure development and is going to vary over time and by geography. And then finally, and consistent with the statewide hierarchy, disposal efforts. In a lot of respects, this portion of the report will probably be static over time, absent an expansion of the landfill infrastructure in the state. But given the breadth of this report, that's an important category. And so after the report was issued, the most common question that we've gotten is, what's going on? What are we doing? At least with respect to the county planning, this is what we're looking at. I talked with Pete a little bit over the summer. We're going to use this as a kickoff, but then we're in the process of developing our new county reporting forms. They'll include all the information that was in that document. And then, like with any other kind of effort like this, we're going to do outreach to the people who are impacted. So hopefully at the end of this year, beginning of next year, we'll have a form to everybody who's on this call, to all of ILCSWMA memberships, and then available on our website for comment. We'll have a comment period open before revising and publishing it. And then at that point, that would replace the document that currently exists as the foundation for how these reports are done. One point that I want to make here is that the existence of the form doesn't preclude the use of other materials. Unlike basically every other program that the agency administers, the people completing these forms aren't actually wedded to them. And so if you have a really robust solid waste and recycling planning program, as long as you're checking the boxes of what's required to be included, you don't have to use our form. Our form has will have two primary focuses. One is to give an overview of what needs to be included in order to comply with state law. And the second is to make it as easy as possible and to file a consistent solid waste report, particularly if you're a local government that doesn't have the ability to bring in a consultant or who hasn't recently been able to do some of the studies that might be necessary for a more robust report. And then finally, we're already into our fiscal year 2022. The report contemplated funding being available for plan implementation in fiscal year 2023. And so that's when the earliest that those resources would end up being available. So as I said a couple of times, there's a lot of information online. All of it's still on our website, and it'll stay there for the foreseeable future. So we have the report here, as well as the various other resources. At the conclusion of today's presentation, I'll send this to Pete, and he can circulate it around so that you've got these links. But I would encourage everybody to look at it. A profound amount of work went into this. It was not always the smoothest or perhaps most enjoyable experience for any number of reasons tied to COVID or just the awkwardness of having to do all of this work from some combination of everybody's living room, basement, or deck. But the end product does provide a really well vetted baseline for how we're going to approach, at least from the agency's perspective, our materials management programs for the next 15 years. It gives local government some really valuable resources, and I'd encourage you to use it so that it's not a document that just exists in a vacuum until 5 years from now we're asked to re-examine it. So there's my contact info as well, and yeah, I will now close out and see if we got any questions. And actually, it looks like we don't have anything for right now. So I don't know, Pete, if stuff is open to everybody or anything that you'd wanted to ask. And then, yeah, Jen has posted in the comments the link to the report. Thank you very much. Something that came up a number of times during these calls is that there's that kind of trope that you spend a third of your life at work, so you end up seeing them more often than your family. We saw each other a whole lot, even though none of us were in the same place for a year and a half. So it was you did have that sort of extended family vibe. And so both Sarah and Jen noted about the excitement for next steps. After about a month off from doing the report, I would agree with that. I mean, we have a lot of work still to do, and now people have had a good opportunity to mentally reset. So, should we expect to apply for local government grants in 2022 or 23? That depends on a number of factors. If money is appropriated from the Solid Waste Management Fund, it would be available beginning July 1st of next year, in which case the application window would be the second half of next year. There are a couple of potential exceptions to that. The first would be that if we're aware well ahead of time that it's going to be certainly included in the final budget, at that point in time, we can actually open the application period earlier, which would give us an application window of spring and then a potential first disbursement in July. But provided that the money is there, the most likely application window is sometime in 2022 with immediately available funding. Marta went into the timeline and the solid waste management plan items. So I guess the one of the questions I would have for that is, or I answer, I guess, maybe both ways. The new materials and the new baseline, once we've received comments from everybody, that would be the agency's expectation for those plans going forward. There's nothing that prevents any county from being more for being more compliant with those ahead of time. It's just that until we've had an opportunity to seek comment, that wouldn't be our baseline for evaluating plans. If the question is, what are the timing mechanisms within the plan and for how they would be implemented, ultimately that's going to be plan specific. What we saw in evaluating the solid waste management plans for each of the counties as part of this exercise, but then also looking at other jurisdictional plans, you saw a wide range from pretty open-ended proposals that had clear timing elements, but not a lot of detail, to plans that had a very prescriptive approach to what the targeted end goals were for diversion opportunities, and then how those would be achieved in a meaningfully sequential manner. So the state law doesn't dictate what exactly that looks like. And realistically, that's probably a good thing, just to afford counties the opportunity to craft their plan to meet their individual needs.
James, do you want me to put up a few of the questions then?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so we'll move on. Jennifer Jarlin did note that the report is in there. So if you guys do want to paste that out of the chat, I encourage you to. Let's see here. Sarah, sure. Okay, so Sarah's wondering, should we expect applying the local government grants in 2022 or 2023? When are those grants coming, James?
So so the most likely window would be 2022, provided that the money is there. If it's included as part of next year's fiscal year budget, we would open the window as soon as possible.
Marta is asking the timeline for the swim plan. I think that came up earlier. Maybe we addressed. I'm sorry, Joan. So I'll hop on here. We got Dave Harkey. Yes. So I guess the answer to ILCSWMA is we're going to have a recording of this, and it will be available on the ILCSWMA website within a few days. The rebroadcast is available today if you are still on the page, but we will make this available because it's extensive and it's great information, and James is getting really good at presenting it. So thank you. Let's see. Yes. Okay, we got that answered. So I'm not sure if anybody's got any other questions for James related to the program. Please put them in the chat. Don't know if there's much else we can add. Let's see. Who will be managing the SWMP report at the EPA?
So that is a good and evolving question. Okay, so the reporting will be housed in our group. So it'll be the waste reduction and compliance section. At the time the report was authored, the contemplation was that it would go to somebody in Sunil Suthar's group. Sunil, though, was actually promoted effective about a month ago. And so now we don't know who that person will be, but it'll be, unless I get hit by a train, I'll be here. And so it'll be somebody in my chain of command. But by the time these plans are coming in, we'll likely have a new person in-house. We just don't know who that is yet.
Brian's asking this question. Do you see that, James?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. As contemplated, the report had a definition of diversion, and as we're sitting right here right now, that actually escapes me. But in the broadest sense, I believe it was something to the effect of steps taken to repurpose an item so that it was not landfilled and then ultimately returned to the economic mainstream. So basically a sort of tertiary reading of the definition of recycling, but basically non-landfilling end-of-life handling.
So Sarah's asking this one. Will local government be responsible for expressing interest in grants, or will IEPA take the initiative to reach out to the county?
So if we have money available, we'll reach out. The the local government would need to ultimately apply. But we'll be doing outreach, outlining when the money would be available, what would be required for any application or statement of interest, and who those would go to. So if we have money, we'll make sure to tell you. But then after that, it's kind of like the electronics program where you would need the counties that need to raise their hand and say that they'd like some financing.
Very good. Yeah, if anybody else has a question, Mary's thanking everyone that participated. Let's keep it moving forward. Right on. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Just seeing if there's any other things that are coming through here. There we go. Let's do it. Jen Jarlin says that. So got some motivation behind you, James. We're all in, waiting for exciting things to come. The federal government, is there anything that you're hearing at the state level right now as far as how the feds are moving forward with some of these infrastructure bills that might line up with recycling in the states?
So nothing concrete. US EPA's draft strategic plan strongly implies that there would be financing available to state government, local government, tribes, and potentially private sector for market development and infrastructure enhancement. The draft, though, has placeholders for both the amount of money, the number of potential awardees, and then is pretty lean on the details for what the subject matters would individually be. So it seems like that's certainly part of the plan, but there's not very much detail behind that at this point in time.
Very good. Well, unless we've got some other comments, I think we could probably take a little break. The intent is to come back at 2:30 for our social hour and election results and awards and play a little Kahoot trivia game. So I hope everybody can join us then. Maybe if you haven't gotten your lunch in yet, try to get it in. Take a bio break. Give us a little time to regroup. And just another plug, since I've got so many of you with us right now, tomorrow we're going to rejoin. And we're going to, I'm seeing one other thing coming in here. So let's see here. I forgot what counties be able to. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry, James. So there was that one. Will the counties be able to spend the grants to do local waste characterizations?
So, I mean, that's an element of the plan. The concept for the grant money would be to go to planning. And so, yeah, I would say yes. I mean, anything tied in with the statutory elements of those documents would be covered. So, which will be nice because you get a wide range of flexibility.
Very good. Everybody's asking if we can move up to 2. We can. There might be a few people that won't know it if they're not here, but we could certainly do that. So I'm going to say we'll take a 15, and then we'll open the stage back up at 2:00, and we can move forward from there. So a couple people that do need to know, Mary Ellen, just jump back onto the stage here in a little bit. You can do it now. And Sarah Mummel was also with us. So that's about it from a housekeeping standpoint. I want to thank everybody. Thanks, James. Excellent work. Sorry you're shorthanded over there. Hopefully you'll get some great new additions to your staff. In the meantime, we'll try to be gentle on you. Any closing words?
No, I mean, the only thing I would add, kind of touching on that, is that we know we have headcount covered, so we'll have people coming and just going to take a little bit to get those bodies back.
Very good. All right. Be well, be safe, and we'll see everybody back here on stage at 2:00, and we'll finish her up for the day. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop now. We'll see you soon.